I love the bare feet, by the way. I am rather excited to be here. We are in Highland Park, correct?
Yes.
And this right here is Rabbi Michael. So how long have you been a rabbi?
Since 2005.
Since 2005. I was in elementary school. So I personally believe that there is a lot of correlation between mental health and health in general with finding a community that offers a belonging and things of that nature. I know it's on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What made you want to become a rabbi?
Based on some of the less than positive experiences when I was growing up in really a warm and welcoming Jewish community, I just felt the education could be a little better. I felt the involvement and engagement of the students and kids as I was growing up could have been better. And so moments like being part of a Jewish youth group in high school was incredible. My bar mitzvah when I was 13 was phenomenal. And I had an incredible tutor that was a family friend that lived down the street. I used to joke he was also my dentist. So if I didn't study, the threat for drilling was real. And so those two great experiences. I went to Israel in 1985, and it was one of the most incredible summers of my life and really helped me fall in love with the land of Israel and with the people and with the history and the heritage. And so through the years, I just thought that I would love to try to make it better. I knew I couldn't make it worse. So I decided I wanted to be a rabbi. So after my master's in theater, I just went to work and started volunteering in the local temple. I was greatly influenced around that time. My father died from his battle with leukemia, and that impacted my life. And I wanted to be more spiritual, and I wanted to be more connected to my spiritual roots. So I worked any job I could find and volunteered at Temple Adith Israel in Lexington, Kentucky, and just set my sights on figuring out how to learn Hebrew and how to get enough experience to be accepted to Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cheshire, Connecticut, probably 30 minutes out of both the capital, Hartford, and New Haven.
And how long were you there until you moved elsewhere?
Through high school. So I was in Cheshire actually from the time I was 5 till the time I was 18. And then I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville. And then I went to the University of Kentucky for my master's in Lexington, Kentucky. And other than visiting, never really went back. And eventually my mother moved out of Connecticut and moved to family that we had in Louisville, Kentucky.
So you've been a little all over. You've been to Florida, you've been to Kentucky, you've seen how it is in the South. Was there...
The Kentucky would be very they don't consider themselves South, although it's funny who do and who doesn't, but they'll remind you, we're above the Mason-Dixon line. They get very protective.
How was it being Jewish in Kentucky, though?
It was pretty amazing. Lexington is a big university town, and when I was in mourning for my father and started going to temple regularly, the community just sort of welcomed me. And it's being a university town, you have a lot of professors, a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers, fields that Jewish professionals often track towards. And so for me, it felt like a pretty big community, even though it's probably small by the standards of big city Chicago. Mm-hmm. But they were so warm and welcoming and so supportive. And once they knew what my goals were, the rabbi mentored me and let me lead services once in a while when he was out of town. And the community supported me and encouraged me. It was pretty amazing.
And this happened in Kentucky?
That happened in Kentucky.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That really is. Do you think it was more of a small group flavor down there then? Did you get more of that feel of maybe it's more unique to be Jewish down here? Did you feel the minority?
I guess in Kentucky it's hard not to feel the minority, mm-hmm. right? It was a small Jewish community, but they were engaged, right? They knew they were a small community, but they were committed. They had all been raised Jewish for the most part, other than some of the families that were interfaith. And in a small community, you have to be active. Otherwise, there is no community. And they were active. You would have the congregation would all bring dishes for, like potluck dinners. A lot of the congregation would show up when a family had a bar bat mitzvah in the family to recognize a child being 12 or 13 and coming of age to be a young adult in the Jewish community. They would come together. I mean, they were, I think, very similar, but more than what I experienced in Connecticut. But in Connecticut, it was all about family friends. It was all about who did we grow up with, and all my parents' good friends surrounded us. So there was a strong central community of friends that helped grow and run the congregation in Connecticut, and it felt very similar to that in Kentucky. And just, again, they were so warm and so welcoming. I became part of the family. Like they were like, we're going to raise this young 20-something, and we're going to grow our own rabbi and help him on his way. And the rabbi was a huge mentor, and like I would even babysit his kids, and it was just phenomenal to be part of something, from 1992 until 1998.
It sounds like such a unique experience. How did you know, or when did you know that this is the route that you're supposed to take, and you didn't feel as though you were being called to do anything else?
I've been thinking of it in the back of my mind for years, but after my dad died, I felt very much that I wasn't really living the Jewish life that I wanted to, and I felt I wanted to be closer. I wanted to go all in, and that this was the moment. Like this was a transition point where I could walk away from pursuing a PhD and really try this. And if it didn't work, I could always go back to getting a PhD or getting a job. But if I was serious about this was the time I had enough freedom to take the shot.
Yeah.
And try to get in and try to do everything possible to find out if this was really for me, and just, one step after the other.
Was your dad a very religious person?
We were a Reformed family, so we were a liberal Jewish family. I think he was very spiritual. He was very relational. I mean, he loved people. He loved his friends. He was a school psychologist in a high school in Canton, Connecticut, and just loved taking care of people. And I just saw this as an extension of that. I mean, of course, no one wants to grow up and be their dad. I didn't want to be a school psychologist. I just want to work with people. And being a rabbi felt like similar but different. And it felt like I could give back to all my great examples. I can remember sitting in services between my father and his best friend, and their booming bass voices, and their singing was so incredible, let alone being in a community where men sing, and that they enjoyed it, and that they were always laughing, and that they just put such spirit into how they celebrated their Jewish lives. And it was more just they loved being Jewish, that it was temple was part of it, but it wasn't the only thing.
That makes a lot of sense. You said you were going to reach your PhD at one point. What were you?
I had been accepted to a PhD program in theater criticism.
Theater criticism? Oh,
yeah.
That's unique.
It was, it's the writing, it's the professors, it's those who compare the plays and contrast them. It's looking at the plays and their message. Are they dealing with gender? Are they dealing with race? Are they dealing with history? And evaluating them and looking at them through the lens of modern time versus their time. One of my plays that I wrote my thesis on was like The Singular Life of Albert Nobbs. Glenn Close did the role on stage and then reprised the role in the film, and about a 1800s woman that it was easier for her to live like a man, as a man, and get gainful employment than it was as a woman. And so I would compare that to the short story, and I compared it to the productions, and I compared it to gender and gender roles and gender study. So it was doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of writing.
Have you noticed that a lot of your film classes or studies have helped you in the role of being a rabbi?
I think just my love of film, theater, music makes me more accessible to people. We have more in common, so they can't believe that they have a rabbi that's close to their age or a little younger and has the same interests. And so it helps you start conversations. It helps you have conversations. It helps you make plans to, we should go see this movie or we should go see this band. So a lot of the individuals who grew up in like the 70s and 80s, a lot of their experiences push them out so that they're barely connected to their religion. They're probably not connected to a synagogue or a temple. And they just feel let down. They're like, I don't need it because it didn't connect to me. And so having someone who's a rabbi where they have these preconceived notions of what it means to be a rabbi, and they find out they can have an interesting conversation having nothing to do about religion, but everything to do about them and their passions and the things they love to do in life and their family, it's more meaningful.
Do you think that every rabbi is very different, or do you think now that you have walked down this road, you can say, okay, if you're looking for X, Y, and Z, if you're good at A, B, and C, you should be a rabbi?
I think every rabbi is different. I think every rabbi has their own preconceived notion of what being a rabbi means to them and what being a rabbi means in their life and in their identity. I wanted to be a rabbi who was always myself, so I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I am myself, who happens to be a rabbi, and so I try to find points where I can enter my families and congregants' lives and add value, or just have a relationship so when they really need me, either for something joyous or something scary, or when they're in mourning, that we already have a strong enough relationship that they know that I'm just there as family and rabbi to celebrate with them or comfort them.
That makes a lot of sense. So, being a rabbi for a good amount of time now, what can you say about, I guess, building community and how important that is in this time and era, especially with what's happening in politics and what's happening with entertainment, mostly meaning social media? Do you think it adds a different necessity for the camaraderie, for the religious belief, for that place to come to? Or what's your view on just that topic?
I'm watching as a lot of Jewish communities crumble. Har Shalom is a community that reformed after an older community lost its building, lost its identity, and closed its doors after over 60 years of being a community. And so it's very important for us to be community, so we stayed together and created something new, and I was asked to create something new after that happened. And so I take creating community very seriously, but at the same time, Jewish communities are deteriorating all over the country, and people are disconnecting and feel disconnected. People may be part of it for one reason or another, but maybe only know 3 or 4 families that they're connected to, where it probably used to be 5 or 10 or more families that you were really connected to. Like, I feel like my family had 8 or 9 really close family friends that we spent holidays with and spent time with and vacationed with and watched all of us kids grow up together and went to all the B'nai Mitzvah. And now, if you have 3 or 4 of your community friends come to a bar bat mitzvah, that's a big deal. The fact that you have those 3 or 4 friends in a community. And we're small, so my numbers are smaller. But even in the big temples, you're not seeing the whole temple show up for bar bat mitzvah.
What do you think that difference is? Is it possibly that now anyone can work at any time or reach people they weren't used to being able to reach because they have a cell phone in their pocket? Or do you think it's a correlation more with the upflow in work, or what do you think is the underlying cause of that?
I think the underlying cause is you had a deterioration of quality in congregational leadership in life, that if you raised students that were disconnected, right? I would consider myself both connected and disconnected. I was connected through youth group and through the trip to Israel, but I was very disconnected from the community. I had all the family friends, but we would see them outside the temple as much as inside the temple. And high school, you get busy, so you're not necessarily going to services with your parents on a Friday night as a older teenager. And if you multiply that through that entire generation that grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they don't know what the congregation gives to them. So they're not just like grandparents and our parents where you belong to a temple. They look at, do I get any value out of it? Or they look at, well, I hated Sunday school, so why would I send my kids to Sunday school? Or they are working a lot, and Sunday is their only day to spend with their family, because Saturday or Sunday or both may be dedicated to sports and driving around and dropping the kids off of sports and watching the games or coaching. But Saturdays or Sundays are seen as family time. And so if the synagogue or temple doesn't give really strong value, if you don't find that, well, 10 of our friends are all there, so our kids should go to Sunday school with their friends, then they'll keep them home. They'll all stay home. They'll have, a late brunch at home with the whole family and actually have a slow day together rather than waking the kids up for one extra school day on a Sunday and hearing them complain and they're tired because they probably stayed up late Saturday night. And what parent wants to listen to their kids complain every Sunday? Like, you have a lot of congregations that are getting much better at community and religious schools. So you have some phenomenal programs in the North Shore of Chicago where the kids love going, and that's what you hope it is. But we are fighting over 2 decades of religious school not necessarily being dynamic and the educators not necessarily being engaging. And so the parents right now are sort of fighting that struggle of, what does it mean? What's its value?
So you think the leadership and possible programming could use some enhancing, and that would help the foundation be a lot better for the future?
I think it's been improving for 20 years, if not, you would hope longer. But definitely for the 20 years that I've been studying, for the 15 years that I've been working, I've watched some incredible improvements in many organizations, have some of the top educators and programmers work to create engaging programs. I think the North Shore is one of the best examples of some of the best educators that I've seen.
What do you think they do differently?
I just think they've created different visions over the last 20 years. Like, some of them have been doing it for 30 and 40 and 50 years, have created transition to make it better, to continually make it better. They are not set in their ways, so they experiment. They're not afraid to fail. They try alternative educational possibilities. I know that one congregation in the area has a camp type unit where it's a little more free-flowing, a lot more games for kids that don't want to sit in a seat and in a classroom on a Sunday but want to be moving around. You have some congregations doing electives, so you can do a cooking elective, you can do an art elective, you can do an intensive Hebrew elective. So they're just playing with the educational process, and the inner tools are potentially Hebrew or Jewish history and culture, but they're using as many modern tools as they can because they know that, A, if we don't make it dynamic, the kids will just stop coming. And you want them to retain some of the information, but as much, you want them to love being Jewish. You want them to love the experience. And a lot of them are doing a great job now of improving from what I experienced in the 70s and 80s.
I would take that class or that camp.
Right?
Learn how to cook. I did take, I believe, Tuesday and Sunday Hebrew school, all leading up into my bat mitzvah, which was at 13. I know girls get it at 12 in Israel. So, but after that, I did not partake as much in things until the high holidays or until college, when you had Hillel and then you had a Chabad to go to. And then when I went out to Los Angeles and I was out of school, and I was used to having the Hallel, and you're away from your family. And it was so nice to go find a temple and see if I liked that rabbi, if I liked that community. And I really think it makes such a big difference to kind of find that niche, that group that you do feel good about. And I really appreciate all the different temples that are trying to cater towards 2030s, because they are kind of lost because you're not with your family anymore, but you're still in love with the culture of the tradition, and you want that, feeling and that belonging. So it's really nice to be able to have somewhere to go and like feel accepted. So I really appreciated that. And there are a lot of wonderful programs they're doing now, like Moishe House.
Right.
And a few others that are really great, especially for that age group, because they saw this big gap and wanted to help unite like future couples or.
Well, how do you create community? Mm-hmm. Right? You always have a generation of middle 20s to 30-somethings in any given city. How do you create community? How do you make it accessible? Moishe House, 20 people on a Friday night. Like how large were the Friday nights? Like what was a typical attendance?
Ooh, I mean, it matters on the event, to be honest. If it was an event where there was a lot of food and drinks, you could have 30 to 50 people.
Is that a typical Friday night, like a Shabbat, or a Shabbat smaller?
I would say like a Shabbat, yeah, or like a Sunday brunch with lox. Everyone shows up.
Right? Brilliant. No expectations, not really doing services, food, community. It becomes your community. Everyone's relaxing.
Yeah.
But now you're relaxing with your community. Everyone's Jewish, but the expectation is just meet people. Maybe you'll go find something to do for lunch or dinner. And that's brilliant. Like most of Judaism was meant to be about family, home, dinner table. You look at most holidays are celebrated with a dinner before the holiday, some kind of meal. Most community gatherings will include a meal, either at the temple or, in someone's home. And that's what it's about. Like once you move away from family-centric to temple-centric, you lose because a temple can't compete with a family.
I was just going to ask you what you think Judaism means to you and what you think most people identify with as being Jewish, because there is this question that I get sometimes like, oh, like you're born Jewish, but so it's more of a heritage, and then it can also be more of a religion. Can you explain that difference and also the different types of Judaism someone can identify as?
For me, my Judaism is both cultural, spiritual, and religious. I was born Jewish. I was raised in a Reformed Jewish family, which is the liberal branch of Judaism. You have Orthodoxy, which is more the fundamental branch of Judaism. You have conservative, which Reform and conservative wanted something more modern. And when they were beginning, there were differences, mainly around the laws of kashrut, the laws of dietary eating and what you eat and what you don't eat. And so the conservative movement was founded in the sort of the middle. So you had Reform as liberal, conservative as we still hold to many of the traditions and laws, but we're more modern than the Orthodox. And the Orthodox followed sort of a strict observance of Judaism as they interpreted it. But I mean, none of us were 2,000 years ago, so it's hard to say what is the exact correct observance, because it's hard to follow all the rules in the Torah. You can't follow any of the rules having to do with the temple or with the sacrificial cult. You have Reconstructionists, you have humanists, so you have very many different branches of Judaism depending on individuals' belief systems. So modern Judaism is important to me. I like getting back into community practice and community observance. So in Kentucky, I loved getting back into a community. And so that's important to me. I fell in love with Israel in '85. So I think Israel is very strong. Historically, Jews were never safe in the world until finally they had a state to call their own. And it would be questioned, we're the safest we've ever been, but in this modern times, we're seeing a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-Zionism, anti-Israel. And so I still identify strongly with a strong Israel. And then religiously, I think I love sort of the history of the practice. I love the flow of the holidays as touch points to the flow of a year. I love that Shabbat is set up as a holiday you celebrate for the 52 some Fridays of every year. That you have a holiday every week to take a breath, to take a step back, to be grateful. So it's inscribed for all times to be grateful for the blessings in your life. And I love that slowdown. I love spending time with my community, those who are able to come on a Friday night and be part of their lives, but celebrate this weekly holiday to remember how grateful we should be for all that we're blessed with in our lives.
I agree with that. I think Shabbat is very special, especially right now with having a very interesting attachment to cell phone, internet, social media. So I think it holds an even more special place than it might have used to. But I've never heard the exact phrase or quote that you just said about it being a moment to be grateful for the week. I really like that. I think that's beautiful. Just to clarify on kosher, not kosher, what is that when people say that?
Kosher is dietary rules of what you can and can't eat as written in the Torah. Specifically, most people understand that Jews who choose to keep kosher don't eat pork, don't eat shellfish. So the dues are, you can eat animals that are ritually slaughtered in the old way that have a cloven hoof and chew their cud. So basically cows, deer, sheep, goats. I'm sure there are others, but those are the primary that we eat. Fish with scales, no shellfish. To at least think about what you're eating. The rules sort of say, because God said so, it says don't mix milk and meat. Once you start delving into, why, there's not really a why. It's sort of just God said so. So you either want to keep those rules because they're meaningful to you. Kashrut, food, it's about thinking about what you eat. It's about thinking about the treatment of the animals. But if you try to delve deeper onto the why, it bottoms out with God said so.
Sure.
So there's no real explanation. These were just the rules.
That makes sense. I think it's, so having this be more of a health show, I personally don't like eating meat and cheese together. I know when I was younger, I did have a piece of pepperoni pizza here and there. That was the least thing that would bother me, but I've never had a cheeseburger. I don't want to. I really don't think meat and cheese are good for you to eat together. Something about it in my stomach just doesn't feel right. I think it leads to a digestive issue, and I think that the rule of being kosher is from the eyes of this is not healthy for you. You shouldn't be putting this into your body. Do you think that...
That's just our interpretation. Once you go into interpretation, we're just layering on top of it.
Sure.
But the rabbis will just be like, we don't know. God said so.
Interesting.
So yes, we can layer whatever layer we want. We can layer that the surrounding cultures, a delicacy was goat kid in mother's milk.
Sure.
Right? And the law is do not boil a kid in its mother's milk, sort of to be respectful to the animal, that we don't do that. But again, that's us layering.
Sure.
Or are we just not eating that dish because they eat that dish? Right? Moving away from the culture. We are different. We're differentiating just because. I would say modern kashrut is the ethical treatment of animals. as you move towards organic farming, are they taking better care of their animals? Are they having less of them? Are they allowing their chickens to be free range? Are they taking care of their cattle and their sheep so that you know the animals at least had a decent life leading up to being part of the food system? And so people look at different levels of kashrut, and you see it in people who are spiritual and not religious, that people choose to be vegan or people choose to be vegetarian for very spiritual and health reasons, which is almost a secular kashrut without, they're thinking about it, but they're not thinking of it through a Jewish lens.
Do you know the definition of kosher? Is that just thinking about what you're eating?
Well, no, the definition of kashrut are the food laws of kashrut from the Torah. So, I mean, but even in the vernacular in society is like, is that kosher? Oh, this is totally kosher. So kosher comes to mean that it's acceptable. Like in slang, when people are using it who aren't Jewish, does this have the stamp of approval? Is this on the up and up? Is this okay? But it was all about what foods you can eat and what foods you can't eat. But if you ate something not kosher, you talked about having a pepperoni pizza, it was just a matter of, okay, don't eat it again, wait till overnight, go to the ritual bath, because you're not unclean for an extended amount of time. There are paths back in. So it means that people were making mistakes all the time, and sometimes something unkosher would get into their daily food practice, and they would just wait an overnight, go to the ritual bath, and cleanse themselves and start again. Right? Sort of if you're on a diet. I'm on a diet day 1, day 2, day 3. Oh my God, I ate all that food on day 4. Start the diet again. Day 1, day 2, day 3. Like it wasn't something that was irreversible. It was just something you thought about that was part of your Jewish practice.
I love that. I love that it's not so cynical and it's like you're out for doing this. There's a way back in. There's a way to offer forgiveness and start over. And I think that's really important with maybe having a bad day, like you said, with a diet, or maybe you didn't exercise, or there's something in your habitual routine that you have changed, but you can easily start again tomorrow. I think that's really wonderful and important.
If you think about modern kashrut, you have so many products that think about being kosher in these days. You can go and see the Circle U or the Circle K on products that mean that they've been certified as kosher. They'll say that they're kosher. That factories and companies are thinking about this, which in modern, they're thinking about the level of cleanliness in their production line. They're thinking about all of the Jewish people or any culture that cares about the laws of kashrut. And so they make sure their products fall in line with being kosher so that families who keep kosher can purchase their products. So in this day and age, you find so many more non-Jewish companies thinking about being able to sell to their Jewish and more food-sensitive individuals who are keeping kosher. They're keeping that in mind, and they take that seriously. So their level of thought is one level beyond just making food and keeping a clean factory.
So it's not necessarily the stamp of organic, but it does have its code of being kosher.
It's more a ritual that has health benefits, right? If we were just going healthy, it is healthy and important for a factory and food manufacturer to be completely clean and have everything prepared in a healthy manner. Kashrut means you may keep things separate, you may make sure to do it in a certain manner, but it also, you have to keep it clean, and then whatever the rabbi who's doing the certification says, that little bit extra, but they're thinking of both. And they can't get the certification of kashrut if they're slipping on anything else, because the rabbi is not going to let that fly. You have a lot of controversy. There was like a kosher hot dog manufacturer and they were completely just breaking the rules. So imagine, in like the bigger Judeo-Christian world of thinking in terms of sin, that they were causing every Orthodox family that only ate those hot dogs, causing them to sin unknowingly because they didn't care to follow the rules, because they were expensive or they were lazy. So yes, you can't just get kicked out, but think of the psychological damage of all those people not knowing how long they'd been eating unkosher meat.
Sure.
And I don't remember whether it was just unkosher or unkosher with slight, pork products. Like, I don't know, but it was a big, big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
And they just didn't care.
So is there someone that, I don't know if it's in the FDA or...
No, there's individual rabbis that are part of a union that, get hired to be the inspectors and to be the certifiers.
That makes a lot more sense, because I have heard that to be kosher, it needs to be blessed by a rabbi. But is that a myth?
No, it's an organization. So you have a food organization, usually Orthodox rabbis, because they are the most stringent, and they care about it the most because Orthodox followers keep laws of kashrut the most. It's an organization of Orthodox rabbis that have been certified in the laws of kashrut, and they are hired and sent out to factories all over the world to maintain their certification as kosher and to do the inspections for many food industries so they can have the seal of approval.
So now I'm curious, with that particular instance with the company that failed to comply with the kosher regulations, do you think that they were just printing the kosher seal without a rabbi coming in, or do you think there was a rabbi that for some reason bent the rules? Or
probably a little of both, right? Either you bribe the rabbi or the rabbi is innocent and you just get it cleaned up for a day, and then day 2 revert and nothing matters.
That's horrible. Well, I'm glad that they got caught. So going back to Shabbat and different beliefs of having maybe a more reformed outlook than an Orthodox outlook, because I have a very, half of my family is Israeli, and they're very religious, at least my mom's parents. I remember visiting Israel, and my brother would go to shul on Friday, but I had to stay home and help cook and clean and get everything ready for Shabbat dinner. And then I have been to other more religious services where you would have to sit on the other side of the room if you were a female. So you were allowed in the temple this time, but you had to sit completely on the other side. And it's very interesting how strict they are with that. And there was one particular instance that really hit me, is my cousin that I haven't seen for years came in town from Israel, and he gave my brother a giant hug and a kiss. And he didn't used to be religious, but he turned very religious. He used to be a DJ. And he couldn't give me a hug.
Right.
I was so sad by this. But can you explain maybe what that might mean in his perspective of that rule, of that law, of that segregation of gender, and why that exists?
In Orthodoxy, they just have this belief of complete separation of gender roles. So the mechitza is the division in a temple between men and women. Sometimes it's a screen that goes down the middle and divides it in half so you can sit left or right. Sometimes it goes in the middle and the men sit up front and the women sit up back. And sometimes it'll be a screened balcony where the women sit up in the women's balcony and the men are the bottom leading services. In Orthodoxy, they have a complete division of mitzvot, of commandments. And so the men believe that the majority of commandments are for the men and that the women have lesser commandments. So when it comes to Shabbat and it comes to services, the men are supposed to do the praying, the women are supposed to do the cooking. And so they maintain that. So when it comes to not being hugged by a now Orthodox cousin, it means he's gone to a level where he won't touch any women who aren't his wife or, say, a mother or a sister. That there's no contact, and it's just a level of observance of propriety. And so they're trying to live the most righteous life they can, and they don't want any tempting. So the less contact you have with women who aren't your wife, the less tempted you are. So it's just this separation of propriety and staying righteous and following the commandments.
That makes sense. So family that's mother, sister, okay. Cousin, not okay.
Right.
Interesting. Well, thank you for explaining that. The other question I have is, when I spent some time in Israel most recently for Birthright, they described this situation that was occurring. And so Tel Aviv right now is not abiding by Shabbat rules. They're not closing on Friday nights or Saturday mornings, and it's kind of shaking up the religious, political group, or just the energy. It seems like there's a change about to happen, and I think they're concerned about drawing the line, but I just want to see what you think that's about, or the standpoint there, because it seems like there's some upset with stores being open. Have you heard of this happening?
I haven't heard of it happening, but in my lifetime since '85, Jerusalem has always been Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv has always been Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv has always been a completely modern Jewish Israeli city. So I've never seen it shut down on a Friday or Saturday. Like, there's always stuff to do on a Friday or Saturday in Tel Aviv. Maybe in Jerusalem, I've seen businesses push back, businesses that don't want to be closed on Friday, that don't want to be closed on Saturday, that might not be Jewish businesses, or might not be Orthodox businesses that want to provide service for those who are more secular in Israeli society, so that they have something to do. Saturdays, in 98, 99, when I lived in Israel for a year, the Cinematheque would open at 4. Clearly not on a Saturday. Clearly not sundown on a Saturday, but they would stay closed. Or sometimes they would have a midnight movie on a Friday night. So clearly not closed. But Tel Aviv has always been this modern city that sort of was the different from many parts of Israel where it wasn't following the rules of Shabbat, where people were driving on Shabbat, where people were going out on Shabbat, going to dinner, people were able to do stuff on Saturday. So I haven't heard that there's now controversy that the Orthodox are trying to push back, because Tel Aviv has been one of those cities in Israel that has never really been controlled by the Orthodox or the rules for Shabbat.
The other question I have, kind of in line with that one, is Tel Aviv, at least this year or the few past years, have held one of the biggest gay pride parades. The thing is, I heard that it is not accepted for the LGBT community to be of existence in the Jewish community, at least in Israel. I don't know how much of that is true. I just heard that it's extremely looked down upon. But then for them to maybe open the gates of Tel Aviv and try and bring in all of these people to have this, giant parade, I'm wondering if that's more of just like an economic tactic, or what do you think is the truth behind that?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. I've always known Tel Aviv to be the most multicultural city in Israel. So you're never going to have Orthodox communities accept LGBTQ. Mm-hmm. It's just not in their nature. It's not within fundamentalism. They don't have flexibility for that. But again, Tel Aviv is trying to be an open city within Israel. So that's why you find the largest Pride Parade in that region, if not the only Pride Parade in that entire region, would be in Tel Aviv.
Just something I thought was very interesting. Okay. The last question that I have for you is catered more towards what's happening now in the Jewish calendar. I know you said that there are some big upcoming holidays. Can you talk about your favorite holiday and also what you will be doing in order to prep for this holiday season?
I think my favorite holiday is probably Rosh Hashanah, even though the approach of the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are very work intensive, very many details to put together to get the high holidays ready that are usually fall in the fall. But it is the celebration of the creation of the world. So two of the stories that it falls back on from the Torah are creation itself, which I find fascinating, that without what we would call modern science, the rabbis and storytellers sat around and what we would call reverse engineering, they figured out what probably happened to cause creation. In modern terms, we say the Big Bang, they call it the 7 days of creation, but that storytelling fascinates me. And I am so grateful for creations and the miracles and blessings within creation, be it creation itself or evolution or the combination of both. So Rosh Hashanah is just one of my favorites. You change the shape of the challah, the bread that we eat, from a braided loaf of bread to a circular loaf of bread. Many people put sweet raisins into the circular loaf of bread to show the circular nature of the year and the cycles, the sweetness of the year. We dip apples in honey, again, to show fruit and the harvest and to show the sweetness of the year. And it's just so powerful for me to have, once again, this beginning. And to me, it's sort of funny. It's not in the beginning of the Jewish calendar. So you would think the new year, it's like late in the calendar, but it's a marking point to mark something we can't mark. Like we can't know what day that the world was created. But Rosh Hashanah, the new year, is just one of my favorites. And then going into Yom Kippur, the 10 days later, the Day of Atonement, having a day to really look within and to clean out your year and to apologize to anyone in your life you may have hurt, even inadvertently, and just ask them to forgive you and to give yourself forgiveness for not being perfect and having imperfect moments in a year, to draw your family in and hold them and tell them how much you love them and apologize for anything you may have done to cause them hurt, and to try to really look at an inner cleaning, try to clean up the inner garbage, try to figure out what would it mean to have a better year, what would it mean to do better. Mm-hmm. I love that process. And then 5 days later after Yom Kippur, you go into Sukkot, an ancient harvest ritual of reminding ourselves when we lived in huts by the fields, so we could do the whole harvest but not have to walk back to wherever the house was, and to like just live in the field, do the harvest, get it done, and to again celebrate the bounty and celebrate the gratitude for being fed for another year, for having a bountiful harvest. At the end of Sukkot, you have Simchat Torah, which symbolizes the end of reading the Torah. The Torah ends with Moses dying, and we immediately go back to the beginning of creation. So we start with Rosh Hashanah and the birthday of creation, and you end with Simchat Torah 30 days later, and you have the returning to the beginning of the Torah, returning to creation. And it's such incredible bookends, such an incredible period in the year to really celebrate with family and friends and celebrate almost all aspects of life.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for talking about all the different belief systems and clarifying some of the terminology, debunking some myths for us, and also just shining light on your background and history as a rabbi.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course.